Oh my God.
Hey everyone, welcome to ArtiFact number 18. This is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. I probably have you covered. Today I'm joined by Canadian historian, singer-songwriter, poet, ballet dancer. I think she said she also did some swing dancing, pilot, university professor, YouTuber, podcaster, deadlifter, kayaker, and most recently, also a saint and savior. I heard this story recently that Eva Schubert was hiking and she found a grown man, an adult man that needed help, right? So she literally brought him down a mountain, right? As if he was like a little baby or something. So I don't know, maybe we could get into some of those stories in a little bit, but Eva Schubert does a whole lot of things, and we're going to go over some of this material. We're also going to touch on some of her favorite artworks. She's a fan, for example, of T.S. Eliot. So we're going to spend some time going through The Wasteland. It's a poem that I have not covered on this channel before. So hopefully this is just going to be something new for you guys. And it's also, you know, something outside of kind of like my own aesthetic preferences. I think I captured some of your internal realities. Is there anything you want to add about who you are? Anything else you want to say before we begin?
Well, I just want to say that that's a very gracious and also eye-catching or ear-catching introduction. I feel a little bit like I'm not all those things all the way, all the time. Everything you said is true, but perhaps not equally weighted. But thank you, because it's very flattering, but I feel like I've maybe been overstated slightly.
Well, I mean, literally, they were all factual statements, I think.
It's true.
Right. So, at a minimum, right, we're not going to be held accountable for any kind of misstatements here. So I guess we could start with like talking about growing up, how you got into the arts. I mean, some people have very kind of specific stories. Others don't. I personally was a very kind of late bloomer when it comes to anything, even like barely intellectually related, right? I only started reading books, period, when I was like maybe 16 years old. And the arts came just soon after that. So I always like to see and hear of these like so-called origin stories. So like, what is your origin story?
Well, it's a funny thing. Because in some ways, I would identify with you as being a late bloomer, depending on which art we're talking about. But in other ways, depending on how you look at it, it goes back a long way. So to explain what I mean by that, I was into reading very early. I mean, I read everything I could get my hands on, including a lot of things that were probably too advanced for me at the time. I got into Shakespeare, I think, at the age of 10. And I found like the Penguin footnoted editions in the library, which was very useful for me because the minute you had a question about a word, there was a little number and the answer was right there at the bottom of the page. And, his sonnets and his plays, I was fascinated by all that and very quickly became enamored of poetry. And so in part, it was because I was required to memorize poems as part of my education. And that was a very different kind of education than most people get in the public school system. So let me clarify that by saying I wasn't in public school until the last 2 years of my high school education. But there was a curriculum that we were following, and there were textbooks, and there was a requirement often to memorize a poem a week. And you'd get things by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and, that sort of thing. But to memorize those words is to discover their rhythm and their music, because those kinds of poems, the ones that you can memorize, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. I remember memorizing that one voluntarily for Christmas one year and reciting it because it was so damn musical. It was so much fun to say. It has this rhythm, it has this lilt, and there's the construction of the rhyme, and there's the story that comes out of it. And so I was fascinated with that and exposed to it very early. And then, of course, I found T.S. Eliot's proof rock and that was that. So that goes back a long way. And I would say that I've been reading poetry since forever and writing it pretty much at about the same time. I have things that I tried to write when I was 12, and they were what you'd expect from a 12-year-old, but it started, that fascination with words and their music very early. But the music and the songwriting is a very recent thing. It's really in the last 7 years that's happened. Mm-hmm. And that happened over a pot of oatmeal. I was working on these lyrics at that point because I loved jazz. That went back for a very long time as well. And so I was trying out writing some jazz lyrics, but I was convinced that, music wasn't something that I did. It wasn't something I could do. Any training I'd had in that was extremely rudimentary. Some basic piano lessons when I was a kid, so I could accompany my brother on piano duets, because he was supposed to be the piano player, and I was supposed to be the ballet dancer. Those are the arts lessons that I got as a kid, which was a great introduction to physical exertion, but it wasn't really an introduction to music in terms of creating it or participating in it. There was one morning I was writing these lyrics and I was thinking, well, perhaps I'll write them and somewhere, somehow, someday, someone else who does music can come along and set these words to music, and then there'll be a song maybe. And so I was going over these lyrics in my head, and I was stirring this pot of oatmeal in the morning, and suddenly I could hear music behind the words. And I was just like, oh my God, what's going on? And I knew that it would be gone in a second. So I ran over to my computer and I tried to find some free software to download so I could just record my voice, with that music in it, like humming it or singing it, so that I could remember. And from that day on, it was like a tap had been switched on in my brain. And when I was started to write song lyrics, I could very quickly find a melody for them emerging, and then some. And then as I went on, it would happen the other way around too. So that's been a relatively recent discovery. So in that sense, I'm a late bloomer.
Yeah, I mean, all that is interesting. Just a couple of comments based on what you said. So first of all, like, I don't want to undersell myself too much, in the sense that, like, I definitely was not a reader when I was, like 7, 8 years old or whatever, 10, 12, that came during my teenage years. But I do remember just kind of always surrounding myself with, creative writing projects, let's call them. I was lucky in the sense that, I had a childhood that was, only quasi-digital, right? I grew up and I had, early on, I had a computer. And this was like even, a little bit before the internet. But I remember like turning on this computer, and on the one hand, there were like a bunch of computer games, which I was really into. But then on the other, there were like tons of like creative writing, like programs and software on it. And I spent, lots of mornings and nights and lots of time that I remember, like my brother, like playing games. I did spend a lot of time just like straight up writing. Right. And they kind of captured like a kid's imagination kind of well, because there was stuff like clip art, right? They try to kind of make it more palatable to you. And I would write these like very convoluted stories, very kind of like ornate vocabulary, right? I would sit with the dictionary and I would try to like, look stuff up. But to the extent that I had books around me, maybe I would like try to find words or sentences. But for whatever reason, I was just not into reading, but I also wanted to write. Maybe there was this feeling of like, wanting to express myself in some way. But of course, it's only when you get older that you realize like, hey, the only way you could really express yourself in a way that matters is you have to somehow absorb, right, material that people did before you, right? Because most likely, you're not like the most brilliant person coming on the planet. Right. You're going to have to sort of sharpen yourself against work that came before you. So there was that aspect. And eventually when I got into reading, right, it was a very specific moment. I was at this point, I was already into rap music. I remember my first, like, I guess, truly artistic experience was I was listening to this Nas album, Illmatic. It's a classic of early 90s hip hop. And I remember listening to this one song in my headphones when I was 15. And I thought, wow, this is not only well written, it's just very different from other material. I wonder why I have this kind of feeling. And I would just sit there listening to these words. And eventually I came across this book, which was kind of like, I guess, hip hop adjacent, called Soul and Nice by Eldridge Cleaver. It's a political book. It's a book written by a co-founder of the Black Panther Party. And I read it in 2 days, which to me was just unbelievable, right? It used to take me months to read a single book. And from that point on, I was like, I'm interested in this stuff, right? I was always the kind of person that never really left the house too much. I mean, my whole family's like that, going back multiple generations. My great grandmother's like that, never wanting to leave the house, just kind of like, hang out at home. And I realized that, even though I don't really care too much about making friends and stuff like that, what if these writers and these names that are cropping up in these books, what if they could be my peers? What if my competitors are these people, as opposed to like, random people on the street that you're connected to in no more substantive way other than pure happenstance? Right. So I kind of took immediately that, one thing that rap has that modern art does not have is it has a great sense of competition. It does a lot in terms of, establishing some kind of hierarchy of good, bad, and mediocre. And you have a bunch of people that are constantly competing, to be the one, that could say that about themselves. And I remember, so soon after I started reading, like coming across novels like Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, poetry by County Cullen and others, and some stuff that struck me as like really good writing. I thought, wow, for whatever reason, I think that this is great writing. In fact, I know that this is great writing. I know that this is a great novel. I know this is a great poem. And right now I need to establish, right, myself in a sense where I cultivate the vocabulary where I could explain why something works and why something doesn't work. And eventually, that led to trying to write. And like you, I was also kind of feeling like, there's certain things that I just don't do, right? When I first started writing poetry, I was thinking like, okay, I maybe I could do poems, but a novel, that's too long. It's too complicated. It takes too much attention. No way do I have the attention span to write a novel. And I discovered Dan Schneider's website, Cosmetica, and I saw that, he did all kinds of criticism. He had, essays about culture, politics, history, film. And I thought, what? It seems like film is important in the sense that it, like, some of the greatest art is being done in this genre, in this medium. But that's not me, right? I don't watch film. I don't critique film. But then I started thinking, but why should I feel that way? Like, why should I limit myself? Like, what is it exactly about me that's making me feel like I shouldn't do this? Like, it has to be some sort of emotional shortcoming, right? It has to be some sort of insecurity going on. There must be something happening that's preventing you from being like your fullest, most comprehensive self. And, like soon after, like getting over the idea that I wasn't a film watcher, I literally had a book on like all of Woody Allen's films, right, where I critiqued them, almost scene by scene in a lot of these movies. So, I guess there's a lesson in there about, limits, imagination, the kinds of, strictures that people put upon themselves. And I think that's going to unfold more and more as things unfold in this conversation.
I'm going to pick up on that and say that that's a major, I think that's a very common experience, and it's iterated differently for different people, but it's a very common challenge, is that we kind of have these ideas of who we are and what we do, and we kind of create our own little box, and then we stick ourselves in it. And it's wonderful if you've had the opportunity to see that there's more of you outside that box, that you're more than what fits in that box. I think there are some people that don't ever manage to get past that. But if you're fortunate enough to have those experiences, then you realize, hey, if that happened once where I said, I'm not this person, I couldn't do this, but then look, I did it. If you've had that experience once, then you can have it again. It's easier to do again because you can say, oh, remember that time when I said to myself, I don't do X? Well, that turned out to be wrong. So maybe I'm wrong over here too. And I think the first experience that really profoundly brought that home to me at a very important time in my life was actually to do with flying. Mm-hmm. And so I was 17 and I'd gotten onto a scholarship program, very competitive. You had to do a ton of exams. You had to be an all-star student. You had to go through review boards, whatever. But if you got onto this program, and it was a very small program, I think it was only 40 students nationwide, you could get your pilot's license, and it was a scholarship, so you didn't pay for it. So I'm on this program. I've never seen the inside of the Cessna airplanes that we're going to be learning to fly. And 9 days into that program, my instructor said to me, okay, Schubert, tomorrow you're going to solo. And I just remember that moment where I kind of looked at him and I thought, he must be out of his mind. Yeah, I mean, he can't be serious, but he certainly was. And he's like, yeah, show up tomorrow and you'll take the airplane up by yourself and so on. And I remember going back to my bunk in the barracks that night and just overwhelmed with anxiety, like, how can this be happening? What if I make a mistake? I mean, I can crash the airplane, which is worth thousands of dollars, humiliation, disaster, death, maiming, all kinds of bad things, right? And finally, I managed to talk myself down by saying to myself, well, this guy has taught a lot of other people how to fly. So he's probably not crazy. Therefore, if he thinks that this is something I'm capable of doing tomorrow, maybe he's right, and I just don't know it yet. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's exactly what happened. I showed up the next day. He handed me the keys. He wanted me to take the airplane up, fly a few circuits, land it, whatever. It was not a big deal. And that lesson was magnified at the end of the course, which was only 7 weeks long. But at the end of that course, they basically toss you the keys to an airplane. They toss you some maps and they say, okay, your job is to chart for yourself a route that's going to take 100 nautical miles. And you figure it out. You figure out how much gas you need. You figure out your navigation. You adjust for the wind. You figure out who you have to call on the radio, blah, blah, blah. You file a flight plan. And I don't remember anybody checking it. I mean, maybe.
Was anybody supposed to be with you in the plane?
No, solo. So now maybe they checked it after you submitted the flight plan. I don't know, but I wasn't privy to noticing that anyone was double checking it. It's like, okay, here are the keys. There's the maps. File your flight plan with us, and you go fly it tomorrow morning. So I did all of that. I got there the next day, and you had to do this to graduate. This is a requirement. So got into the airplane, took off, and I'm up there by myself, and I'm checking my navigation against this island and that island and so on. And I'm flying over this fairly large airport on Vancouver Island. It's Victoria. So I'm on the headset just like this, and I'm talking to the tower, tower, this is Charlie Foxtrot, Delta coming in for landing on runway 26 left, blah, blah, blah. And then I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm doing this. There's nobody else in the airplane. This is not a movie. I'm the one with the headset. Like, I'm the pilot here. This is happening. Like, pinch me, right? And I'll never forget that moment, because coming off that course, it was something that here was the circle of things that I thought that I could do. I was standing inside this circle, and that experience just blew it open like this. And so ever since, I'm always looking for experiences that gonna blow that circle open a little bit more, because there's nothing as exhilarating as finding yourself on the other side of something that you weren't able to do not long ago.
Yeah. One thing I noticed that was kind of funny, I'm not sure if this was conscious or not, or if it's revealing of anything, but as you were saying that story, there was a moment where you were like, oh my God, I'm flying this thing by myself. I could crash it and it costs thousands of dollars. Is that really what the concern ought to be, that this is going to be an inconvenience for someone else financially, as opposed to like, your own death?
No, there's a joke about that, in those kinds of places. It's like, you know what? If you're going to get hurt, then just die, because it's less paperwork. You know, these were the kind of jokes. So it was like, oh my God, there will be disgrace and there will be financial damage. Mm-hmm. The fact that you yourself might also die in this was kind of the least of your concerns.
Did you have like a similar kind of set of fears when it came to writing? Because I remember like when I first kind of realized that, hey, I could actually write poetry well. And here I was like on the cusp of like, starting and then finishing a novel. I definitely got the sense of, if I keep writing now, and if I keep like, doing these novels or whatever else, I really cannot stop, because if I stop, I am sort of turning back on what is clearly it showed itself to be the most substantive part of my existence. And if you turn, your back on that, I guess for some people it wouldn't matter, but generally speaking, for a lot of people, they would feel like that they're just pretty much in a situation where they're going to have to live with regrets forever, and they're going to have like just cultivating so much self-loathing, as the years go on, and they're not doing the thing that they know they're supposed to be doing. Did you like have any similar experiences when you were like crossing that river, as it were, into writing and songwriting and music, or what?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. Because so the songwriting and music thing is only the last 7 years, and it's a huge learning curve, right? Because you're not just writing lyrics and you're making music, but there's a whole other side of things you have to learn to produce albums. I mean, the process of finding a producer and getting musicians and working out arrangements, and there's a whole bunch of other things. There's the social media and whatever. So there's a whole lot of learning. So there's a lot of energy that is required, and there's really no money, mm-hmm. Right? So at a certain point in time, when this is competing in your life with everything else for your time and your effort and your energy, and it's not bringing any money back, you have to ask some hard questions, like, okay, why are you doing this? You could be doing something else that would bring in, say, more money, and you can use that money to do other things in your life that you might want to do. But you're not doing that. You're doing this. So why are you doing this thing? And you have to have a good answer to that. And I think most artistic people go through cycles where they have to face this question at various times, and the answer might be different. But for me, it was that it brings such a profound sense of joy, and a sense that I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, in ways that very few other activities touch. And also, when I think about death, when I think about, people that die on the highway on a sunny Wednesday afternoon on their commute home from work, there was nothing wrong with them physically. They just happened to be at the wrong place when some half-drunk person swerved, like I've seen this happen. I've had experiences like this that could have been the end of my life. And I know that everything is contingent, and that you don't know how much time you have left. So one, it's a strong sense for me to be busy doing the things that I think are worth doing, and also checking what I'm doing against, the imminent reality of death. And, when I'm dead, or if I have the chance to kind of look at it coming, maybe I've got a 6-month diagnosis, or, whatever it is, what are the things that I'm going to be glad that I did? And what are the things that I'm going to be unhappy I haven't done? And whenever I run that experiment in my head, it's like, oh, I'm so glad those songs are out there in the world and not sitting there on a file in my computer condemned to eternal obscurity, and so that's a big part of my answer. But you have to ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, all that is interesting. Like, I have a few things to build off of that. So, there's someone that I know pretty well. He asked me a few years ago, when I was like in the middle of like another novel, more art projects, more, everything arts adjacent that I'm doing on top of that. And he asked me, well, I don't get it. Why are you doing this if you feel like maybe this novel won't get published or you won't really make money off of it? And to me, like it was honestly like one of the most shocking questions that I've ever been asked, because I feel like anybody that actually knows me, right, or thinks at least that they know me, they would never think to ask something. It's such a silly question. It's like it's like, what do you mean why I'm doing this? If there's no publication, there's no money. Why would I be doing this for money? Is that really what the concern ought to be? And it's especially surprising because I mean, this person like grew up with me like on hip hop, right? And one of the lessons from there was there's a huge difference between commercially viable music and stuff that is truly well written or just trying to do something interesting and different. And we would like, when we were younger, we would go around being proud of this fact. Like, we're listening to something worthwhile. We're not giving our attention to the undeserving. So now as an adult to ask me this question, have you simply like turned back on all of your core values? Yes. It's very upsetting. It's very depressing. And it's also depressing because, I mean, a lot of these people are intelligent people, and yet this shows you that even with people that are, otherwise intelligent, this is how most people operate, right? This is at the level that they're at. This is how they think. They can't conceptualize something of value that goes beyond like, a purely like almost financial concerns or things like fame or like whatever. Yeah. And also, so you mentioned, for example, that one of the reasons why you would be drawn to art is, as a creation, is the joy, right? Especially when you finish something that is worthwhile, right? This is something that really sticks with you, satisfies you. And this is absolutely true, right? There really is no feeling like finishing a novel, right? Finishing a poem, especially if it turns out well. There's absolutely nothing like it. At the same time, while that is true, right, and I'm always kind of like, I always try to be careful about various human motivations, right, because people always want to, sort of like pretend like they don't have certain motives. I mean, I am very much guided by that kind of joy, right? It does bring me actual happiness, right? Unlike anything else. I'm also motivated by the idea that, hey, you know what? I grew up with all sorts of insecurities. I grew up feeling, that, like there was like no security in my life as well. Like there are things that I had to fear. There are problems in my family. There are problems in the outside world. If I create something of value, at least I could tell the world, I was here, I was worthwhile. And look, I'm dead, but you're still reading my shit. You're still obsessed with the stuff that I'm doing. You're probably like trying to research bits and pieces of my life. All of that is there, right? Like that's part of the motivation. I don't want to deny that, but I also know for a fact that I would never actually go through the process of writing and creating if I didn't think that it was long-term worthwhile for the world, right? It's true that you're getting some consolation out of it personally, like maybe you feel like you're going to be remembered, or maybe you have that joy out of creation, but realistically, the most important part of all of this is not really your kind of subjective experiences here. It's not the fact that you feel good while it's happening. It's the fact that you're actually creating something of value for society. And like you mentioned, you're doing it in like the most expensive way possible, because think of the time you have to sink into it. Think of the money you have to sink into it. Think of the various kinds of, career choices you have to make that are kind of, open-ended enough that you have time enough to create and, all of that. It's a very expensive prospect. Like if you think of human beings as these kinds of like utility machines, there's a lot of stuff that human beings can do in terms of pure productivity. A person could single-handedly, for example, save thousands or perhaps even millions of lives, right? And if you decide instead to do something that's kind of opaque, something that has a very different kind of value proposition that is much harder to quantify, and yet that it's there, there's a lot of stuff that it does to you mentally, right? even for example, having children, right? You're just kind of like thinking of it as, on the one hand, I want to bring kids into this world, and I want to, raise them correctly, and I want them to propagate my own values, right? Hopefully, or rather, you don't want to be so kind of, authoritarian about it, but you want them to propagate some set of values that are positive, and you think this is going to reverberate through society down the road, right? Hopefully, if people have kids, that's at least part of the analysis that they're making. But that's also expensive financially, time-wise. That does take time away from these other concerns that you have, especially artistic concerns. So, these are just the questions that have been flitting through my head, right, when it comes to the arts. And I noticed that they're very rarely discussed, right? You very rarely see art shows or just artists in general, mentioning this kind of stuff, partly because so many people don't even think of the arts as an arena for improvement. It's not an arena to quantify things in. So it's like, if I'm an artist, I just sort of, sit around and I do this or I do that. And, it's all the same anyway, right? It's all of equal value, right? But we know better. We as actual good artists know better, right?
For sure. And I'm going to pick up on a point that you were making there, which is about the need to communicate. Like, yes, of course, it's good that it gives you joy, but ultimately there's got to be a goal there, something you're shooting for that is outside of yourself when you're doing the creation of whatever it is you're making. And I think that's driven by the need to communicate with other people and to do so in a way that is effective and that says something valuable to them and that can continue to speak to them after you're gone. Mm-hmm. And if you've done that, then you've succeeded. And the extent to which those things that you leave behind reverberate and speak to people, I think, is one of the measures of your success. And so, I mean, there are lots of people that like to call themselves artists. And I always get a little bit suspicious of people who kind of front load that word, and I'm an artist,
Yeah. Oh my God.
And I'm sort of like, okay.
Yeah. You almost don't want to say it, right?
Yeah.
I was before I got married, I was very big on crafting like the most perfect dating ads, right? In fact, I could have probably done it professionally back when like Craigslist was like usable for stuff like that, or like whatever. And one thing that I avoided talking about art. First of all, like I maybe I would make like poetry references or something, but like I wouldn't like talk about being an artist. And I would especially go out of my way to avoid any dating ads from women that call themselves artists, because there's a lot of shit that I don't want to deal with. And because first of all, many people that are artists, right, they're sort of like they have neuroses, right? They have some instabilities, and I've worked through a lot of this stuff, but I still have some of that myself. So you're dealing on the one hand with that. And then on the other hand, you're dealing with the fact that most likely this partner is not going to be talented, right? So you have this like double-edged, sword of shit, right? Where, these are the people that you want to avoid.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also like don't want to be associated with like the people that typically say that I'm an artist, right? Especially, like I'm not sure how it was in previous generations, but, it seems like everybody now is an artist, right? Because it's accessible to everyone. And that's, that's also a problem.
Yeah. And I just think that people who are busy kind of wrapping themselves in that label, they want to borrow this aura from that. And that speaks to me already of like, okay, what's the insecurity here? What's the posturing going on here? Because if you are really someone who's dedicated to that, you don't need to tell people. If they get to know you at all, it's going to be pretty obvious. It's kind of like people who go around with like labels on their t-shirts, If you have to put the word lady on your t-shirt, it's a pretty good sign that you aren't one. Because if you were, you wouldn't need to be telling people. They would already know, and I think that art is exactly the same. It's about what you do more than what you say. And so if I hear someone who's kind of incessantly flapping their gums about it, I'm sort of like, okay, I don't know about that. And it just speaks volumes about egotism and about insecurity to me. And I like you, I kind of, want to tiptoe away in the other direction. I'm not drawn to be like, oh, really? Me too. No, not at all.
Yeah. 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 And nothing I'd say. So like maybe now we could transition into some of your albums. But before we do that, I just want to comment on the fact that I was listening to your interview with Dan Schneider. And one thing that jumped out to me was the fact that you use the word communication, then didn't use it again here, right? And, you know, like you're not part of our little, you know, I don't want to sort of put it in deflationary terms and call it an echo chamber, but it's true that people within the cosmetic orbit are more similar to each other than not. And one thing that Dan has always argued is that, you know, art really is and ought to be about communication. It ought to be something that you impart a value to someone else that they could get something of value from. And if you miss that communication part, it means that they can't actually get something of value. Perhaps some people could do so subjectively, but you know, there's any given number of subjective experiences that people have. They could have aesthetic experiences, but over a long enough time frame, it's really the objective stuff that tends to remain. So if you have the communication down, then you have something of value. And in your interview with Dan, like you were mentioning, you know, this word communication, and you definitely had like a very kind of competitive streak to you when you were discussing your lyricism, when you were discussing how you craft things. And honestly, like this is the way it's supposed to be. In preparation for this conversation, I was like reading some stuff about T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, for example, you know, saying things like, you know, like warning other poets, like keep in mind that poets and writers and artists are very, very competitive. And when you think of applying that to today, that's not really the case anymore, is it? When people talk about I'm a competitive artist, what they mean is I could sell the most records. I could have the biggest show. I could go to the best gallery. I could make the most money. They've lost exactly what, you know, it entails. And later on, when we're going to talk about the wasteland, you know, if T.S. Eliot is trying to sort of, you know, put together thousands of years of human history and respond to it in some way, I feel like the past century alone necessitates yet another wasteland that has to invert, right, so many of the things within the wasteland, because we've accumulated almost an exponentially larger amount of baggage just in the century alone. And I don't want to be fearful about it, but it does make me nervous in the classical sense of like being on nerves, right? Thinking about what the next century is going to bring, right? Creates a lot of nervous energy within my heart and within my mind. Let's transition into the albums. As far as I'm aware, you have 3 albums, right? One in 2015, 2017, and in 2019, and you just finished recording your 4th album.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Is that going to be an EP as well? Like how long is it going to be?
No, it's going to be a full-length album.
Okay.
We went in there and recorded 9 tracks. Then I decided to cut 2 of them, so that leaves us with 7. But that's a full-length recording, and it was a lot of work. I mean, I put the last vocal recording down 10 minutes before I was in a vehicle heading to the airport to go home.
Mm-hmm.
That's how tight it was. That's how much work there was to do. And we did it in 5 days. I arrived kind of in the middle of the day on Monday, and I was flying out Friday evening of the same week. So we were working at a furious pace, but I'm really happy with what we came out with, and I'm really excited to share that when it's ready.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about a couple of your albums. My favorite that I've heard is Borderless Sky. You wanted to also talk about Hot Damn Romance, which is the one from 2019. But I do want to focus a bit on Borderless Sky because, I mean, honestly, it definitely has some bangers, right? You definitely got some bangers on this album. I remember that when Dan was discussing it, I'm not sure if you picked up on this, but he misspoke at some point and he called it Bottomless Sky. And my first question, I guess, to you is, which of these 2 titles do you think is better? Because Bottomless Sky is also a very good title. It also plays off of language in interesting ways.
I stick by Borderless Sky for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think a lot of the meaning of that is suggested just in the phrase. Mm-hmm. We create borders, we create walls, we create these separate entities, but it's one sky. and it doesn't recognize any of those things, and we all look at it. So there's a sense of limitlessness. There's a sense of kind of the expanding horizon that fades forever and forever when I move, right? To quote Tennyson. And that was the idea behind that album. And of course, there's a song in there that has that title, but it goes beyond the song.
Yeah. I agree. I think your title is better than the mistaken title, but I can imagine like in some sort of project that's like especially abstract, perhaps in some way, right? It strikes me as a little bit vague, right, to say bottomless. But anyway, I don't want to get too off track, right? If you notice in some of my videos, right, I sometimes have like 6-hour videos, right? So I could really, really go off. So I'm glad that we have like a constrained time limit here. So one thing, so like in terms of the macro view of Borderless Sky, I'd say from my recall, pretty much all the songs have something to do with love or romance of some sort. Like, is that a conscious decision on your part to work within like some sort of some sort of tradition or some kind of genre, or do you feel like you naturally fell into it in terms of like this is what's most appropriate to you? You definitely have like tons of inversions when it comes to like the subject of love, the trope of love, which is why, for example, it would be a good album, right, compared to pretty much anyone else that would do an album about love or whatever. But why specifically are you like constantly revisiting this topic?
Well, there are kind of two overlapping reasons. I mean, one of them is that a lot of I think about the jazz genre a lot when I'm writing, because that's sort of my primary source of inspiration. And not all the songs on Borderless Sky are jazz. That was an album where I kind of, started to play outside of the borders of that particular box a bit. But that's where I started, and that's what I think about a lot. So most of the songs in jazz are definitely about love. I mean, you can think about a handful of exceptions, but the vast majority of them dwell on that subject. And there's a certain mood and there's a certain set of emotions that come along with that. And you can be playful about it. You can be mournful about it. You can be sizzling and sensual about it. But they all kind of center around that subject. So in a certain sense, it kind of comes naturally. It's implicit, unless you want to consciously deviate from that, which the song Ribbons and Bows kind of does, right? That's not really about love exactly. It's more about self-image and like who are you doing these modifications for. So it's only tangentially related, but you're right that most of them are about that subject. But also at the time that I was writing that album, there was a lot of pretty major stuff going on in my personal life. And so relationships and the associated emotions were very much at the front of my brain as well, just in a personal way. And so that led to a pretty heavy focus in that department.
Yeah, I'm glad that you didn't say you didn't do the Khalil Gibran thing of like, well, actually, I'm writing about love, but it's all really about God, right? I feel like like lots of people, honestly, they would be kind of uncomfortable with the idea of I'm only working within one tradition. Like they would find it as flawed in some way. And I guess you can make arguments in terms of like trying to expand, but there's also plenty of arguments of kind of like sticking to what you're best at as well, and kind of what you're most drawn to, right? I mean, not every artist can just sort of randomly come across some kind of, stimulus or phenomenon and just sort of say like, oh, naturally, this lends itself to an artistic object of some sort. Let me go in that direction, right? There's nothing like necessitating that really. Anyway, like some of the individual songs I wanted to cover. So the opening track is Backcountry Blues. In some respects, it feels like the lyrics here on this song are a bit more conventional than the rest of the album, but I mean, there's a lot going on there that's kind of like very subtle, right? And you sort of need multiple listens to kind of see that. So, I mean, just the title itself, like Backcountry Blues, just the invocation of the blues, right? There's this, there's a sense of sadness, perhaps melancholy. It doesn't have to be literally so, but I mean, it's a song that seems happy, right? It's a song where the narrator is waiting on someone to come visit her. In fact, like, there's lyrics like, I'm going to wait for you on this, like waiting for you could catch the Midnight Express. But given like the nature of the song, given the music, like the pure music around it as well, there's also the sense that perhaps this is kind of like a figment of her imagination. Perhaps there's an expectation of a lover coming that is not going to arrive. In fact, like nearer to the end of the song, there's material there that you could like arguably say that maybe this isn't happening, right? Maybe, or maybe like he's going to come and there's going to be some sort of rejection after the fact. But given that this isn't like really purely spelled out, and this was just kind of like my immediate impression, do you think that is an appropriate assessment, either objectively, meaning like what's actually there, or subjectively in the sense that this is what you in fact intended, or how would you characterize that opening song?
Well, I would say that your take on it is very perceptive, actually, because I think that if you're just kind of listening to it casually, it sounds like, oh, I'm going to go here and you'll meet me there, and that'll be great. And, we'll play the guitar and we'll do this and we'll do that. But you rightly pick up on the fact that there is no physical meeting in that song. And there isn't really the serious prospect of it. And a lot of those phrases, the Midnight Express, I mean, you can read that as I'll see you in my dreams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was kind of where I was going with it. As a matter of fact, that was one of the earliest songs that I wrote. Even though I put it on the second album, I didn't put it in the first album because the first album was really me trying to do like classic jazz sounds, and that song isn't one of those. So I kind of kept it back. And when I was doing the second album, which had more of a mix of different things, I thought, okay, now is the time to put this song in this kind of mix. But I'll tell you, that song was kind of a magical thing, because I was listening to some music that a friend of mine had sent me, and it was called like jug music, like that's the genre. And I had no idea what this was, but he sent me some links and I was listening to it, and it really made me think of that kind of like bluegrass, backcountry, hillbilly sound. And it has a very like summer, hot kind of feeling to it. And so I was listening to this, and then I went to bed and I was just drifting off to sleep. And then these words started coming in. There's a summer night in Georgia. I'll wait for you there. And the lilacs, and I knew at that point that I had to get up and I had to go to the kitchen and turn on that little light above the stove and grab some paper and a pen and write. And it was like midnight, like I was literally drifting into unconsciousness, but I'm now in the kitchen and I got the first two verses and the chorus down. And then I went back to bed. And I got up the next morning and reviewed it, and then I wrote the third verse, and that's how that song came out. But it very much partakes of that mental state of dreaming, or of an imagined place where you could meet this person, and a meeting that you might long for that may never happen, but you can dream about it. And that's the kind of song that it is to me. So the fact that it communicated that to you is very satisfying to me, because it's like, okay, I was successful in conveying that message, at least to someone who's paying attention, so that's a great sign.
Yeah. In fact, like one of the lyrics that I isolated in my notes to you was, the heat is lazing through the cottonwood trees. There's definitely this feeling of like irreality. And it's interesting that you mentioned like going to sleep. Like I'm not sure if you notice this in your own life, but you definitely get a ton of like interesting little insights in this kind of like hypnagogic thing, like when you're in this like mid-dream state, right? Like oftentimes, like if I'm like taking a nap and I'm in this kind of hypnagogic like interim, let's call it, you would wake up with this like very sudden insight. And oftentimes to me, like it would be like something related to like mortality or just like productivity. Like you have to do this, you have to do that, right? In a way that you don't necessarily get in your waking life. And I mean, this is one of the ironies, right? Like in your waking life, you could sort of drift through life, right? But when you tap into some of these dream states, you do often get into this kind of like internal reality, right? That might not be apparent to you. And another thing that I mentioned was, so like so there's this kind of like bellying, like the melody, like bellies, like at least some of the lyrics. And I mean, like in terms of predecessors, like people that you've been influenced by, you mentioned names like Leonard Cohen. And I mean, there's a lot of like singers that do this like exceptionally well, right? I especially personally love, and also just objectively, this is like a great little artistic twist when you have the lyrics somehow not underpinning, but undermining the music, or vice versa, right? When you have the music undermining the lyrics. And I'm not sure if you listen to Elliott Smith, for example, but he has this song called Waltz Number 2. And it's a little bit sad, but it's also, it's a waltz, right? There's kind of like a dancing quality to it. And at some point of the song, like near the end, he has a lyric like, here it is, the revenge for the tune. And then he goes on and he says, you're no good, you're no good, you're no good, you're no good. Don't you know that it's well understood? Tell Mr. Man with impossible plans to just leave me alone. Basically, like, in the place where I have what it takes, right? And that kind of tension has always struck me as it's something that most artists don't think of. Right. But I mean, it's like, well, if you're doing music and you have literally one half of it is the music itself, the other half is the lyrics, shouldn't you, allow them to cohere in some way, experience tension in some way, jut against one another in some way? Like this is where, like so much of the, like when people approach art, they fail to see that so much of the poetry exists specifically on and because of these kinds of margins. I guess this is kind of like a long way of me asking, what are your influences beyond Leonard Cohen and C.S. Eliot and some of the other names that have been mentioned here and the interview with Dan?
There's a song by a band called Phosophorescent called Song for Zula. And I can't get enough of it. I mean, it's been years since I found that song, but it has this, it's like a trance-inducing quality that it has. It just kind of takes over my mental state, at least. And when I listen to the words, it has this kind of tension you're talking about, because the song purports to be about love. But it's described as, I saw love and he came to me, just a killer come to call from some awful dream. Mm-hmm. Like when people talk about love, you're expecting to think about heartbreak or the joy or the mushy. But here, a killer come to call from some awful dream. And there are other lyrics in there, but the lyrics are poetic. And they're vivid, and they give you images, and they give you a very strong emotional inducement. But if I were to look at this on a page and say, well, how does it work? I couldn't exactly tell you. Mm-hmm. All I know is that it does. It has this profound override of whatever's going on in your mind and your mental state. At least for me, when I listen to that song, it's a vibe, like it just changes the color of everything for me. And I find that fascinating. And I think that no matter what genre you're working in, I mean, Chet Baker is one of my icons from the world of jazz.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I often put on Chet Baker when I'm writing. Right? The perfect, writing in 45-minute increments, like 45 minutes, just put that on, forget like a clock, right? When it's done, you're done. You got to go up, stretch, do whatever, right? And then there's like 3 or 4 other albums, same length, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But it does that to your mind, right? When you
Mhm.
turn that on, you know that it's going to produce that mental state. And it happens to be one that is very conducive for writing and those kinds of things. It's mood music. Like it's sort of like, I mean, I don't really take drugs, but I imagine that the people who
Really?
do,
I don't really take drugs.
no, I mean, I never have, but
Okay.
from what I gather, people take them to induce various physical and mental states. And I
Mm.
think that good art has an effect. Obviously, it's not as intense. Obviously, it's different. I'm not trying to say that art is drugs, but I think that in
It's
terms
more
of,
intense. It's more intense for the right, if
yeah,
you're a sane person, right?
yes, yeah. So those are definitely some additional influences that, and they're very different. I mean, there's nothing. Phosphorescent and Chet Baker are
Mm.
wildly different, but they both have that quality of changing your mental state and of something that you can come back to again and again, and it's going to do that thing for you. And I think that that's one of the things that had in mind when I was working on the songs in this next album, is that there was definitely an emotional state that I wanted really strongly to come through in a couple of these songs, and we'll see if I've succeeded or not,
Mm.
based on how people respond to them. But that's one of the things that I look at and admire and say, I want to be able to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned song for Zula, like treating love in this kind of a different fashion. In your other life, you're a historian, and maybe you could briefly comment on this. Like when it comes to the Greeks and Romans, like their interpretation of love was not exactly the modern interpretation of love. Love to them oftentimes was treated as a kind of infection, right? It was something that perhaps you wanted to avoid. It was something that had definitely some positives, but also some destructive elements. And I think of, for example, of Caravaggio's a classic painting that's been titled in the, at least in the modern times, "Love Conquers All." I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, but Cupid basically has just come through the window or something, and he's dragged this tablecloth and everything that was on it, musical instruments, musical scores, things that are kind of like artifacts of culture that humanity has collectively decided to value, that has come like with love, right? That is being systematically destroyed, right? And like capturing these kinds of portions of love, right? Capturing perhaps maybe like infatuation or lust or whatever might be more appropriate to say in some of these situations. But I mean that's kind of like not only important, but it's also very underrated as a technical skill, as a kind of artistic lens to sort of find an in, right? You always want to have some kind of in, right? Why am I doing this kind of song as opposed to another kind of song, right? You want some kind of a hook that's unconventional in that way. Let me see what else is there. Oh, so like moving on. You have this other song that is one of my favorites on this album, "Traces of You." I mean, it's very clever. The writing is very clever. It has this kind of Cole Porter kind of vibe, right? In terms of like being witty. The opening is, "I've got traces of you behind the shine in my eyes." I mean, that by itself, right? Traces of you in terms of abstracting away portions of like what is it about someone that you love or someone that you're infatuated with, what part of them, right, would you think about when they're gone, right? It is the most appropriate way to think about it, as traces, right? And I think that's appropriate. "Behind the shine in my eyes," right? So obviously people's eyes shine, but specifically here the reference point is, the reason why I have the shine in my eyes is because of this person, right? And all of that gets condensed into a single line, right? It's clever, it's well done. I don't know if other people notice that, but fuck them, right? It's not for them. The show is not for them, and that's perfectly fine. And so it goes on. "Though I try to clean them away, no matter how hard I try, my gravity is denied by the lightness I betray. I've got traces of you in the curve of my smile, which lifts without an excuse. It's embarrassing while work is collecting in piles to find my laughter on the loose. And one thing I wanted to ask you about that is you have this rhyme scheme here that's like A, B, A, B. There's, and also kind of like alternating long and short. There's almost kind of like a slight limerick quality to this song and some of the other songs that you do. What is it specifically about this kind of structure, right? Maybe the alternating lengths or the AB, AAB type thing that you think lends itself specifically to cleverness? Because I mean, even before the lyrics begin, right, before you even hear the end of the first line, there's like something in your voice that's like a little bit devilish. There's something there that just kind of clues you in that like, I am trying to do this like wink and nod, right? I'm going to be clever and you're going to fucking like it. Right. But like structurally, like what lends itself to that specific, like in the song, like, did you do that consciously? Are you noticing this more like after the fact when I mention it or what?
I think it's one of those, I think this song, if I recall, was one of the ones that the melody kind of emerged simultaneously as I was playing with the first verse, the first stanza. And that happens to me a lot, whether I'm writing poetry or whether I'm writing, song lyrics. When I start writing, I'm not really sure often what form it's going to take. You know, it normally starts with a phrase or something that's kind of ringing in the back of my mind. And I know to recognize that, okay, when there's that telltale sign of those couple of words or phrases that just start hanging out back there, I need to get out one of the notebooks that I carry with me everywhere and put it down and then, pay attention and see what else comes out. So normally the first 4 lines, when they're on the page, will kind of dictate to me where I want to go with it. And so I think with this one, it was the first couple of lines and there was a melody that came with it almost immediately. And so that kind of, to fit with that melody, I would have to frame lines that were going to sort of, rest in the notes and the speed that was there. So I didn't sit down at the beginning and say, aha, I want to do, A, B, A, B. I just sort of began with a couple of phrases and the first verse came out. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's the form because I've got a melody now that goes with it. So now I just got to, figure out what the other verses are going to be in this form and, write a chorus. And that's kind of what happened. But because it came out in that tight rhyming way at the beginning, I thought, okay, well, let me stick with that. And, it sort of emerged organically. But you pick up on a lot of things that I think are commonly missed. So I appreciate that. And the Cole Porter thing is exactly what I had in mind as well, because when I think of that song, I think of like a Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald style singing it. Like that's the world that I had in my mind when I'm writing it and the style. And that's all about Cole Porter. I mean, they were singing his songbook most of the time. And so those kinds of lyrics, those clever, funny, mischievous lyrics, there's a duet that Ella and Louis did. Oh, and the name of it is going to escape me, of course, just at the moment I want it. But it was sort of like some kind of love. Like this is like, it's called A Fine Romance. That's what it's called, A Fine Romance. And they mean it very ironically. A fine romance with no kisses. A fine romance, my dear, this is. And then they go off, and it's funny and it's witty and it's a lot of fun to listen to. It's very clever, and a lot of songs like that, especially Cole Porter, do that. So I admire it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I am trying to do justice by you, right? There would be no point of doing these shows otherwise. But there's something about like songwriting that's when I first started writing poetry, I was like, all right, if I could do poetry well, certainly songwriting must be even easier, right? And I've never been able to write like a good song, right? It's just very fucking hard, right? This is true, like whether I try to write like conventional songs, rap lyrics, like just nothing really coheres, right? There's something about that. Like it's a different way of viewing some things at least, right? There's obviously commonalities, across all arts, right? But there's I feel like there's something about this like that always feels like kind of out of reach, and there's just some finishing lyrics here that I want to end this song with that I thought were also clever. So the way that it ends is, I've got traces of you in the fabric of dreams that wrap my starry night. When my eyes open, it seems I see those stars still gleam in the hours of waking light. And I mean, just even that opening, right? I've got traces of you in the fabric of dreams. I mean, you hear all the time, like people fucking singing about like, oh yeah, I'm dreaming of like this, like it doesn't matter, like, because it's all the same shit, right? But phrasing it in this way, like in the fabric of dreams, you're kind of like, on the one hand, you're lending an additional syllable that's kind of structurally necessary, right, to sort of like cohere with the rest. But it's also it's not like a throwaway word, right? It's not a throwaway syllable. Oftentimes when people write poetry, they're clearly, trying to like force a rhyme. They're clearly adding, something to sort of, make the syllable count good. But this does something else. And also like by the end of it, right? Like in Backcountry Blues, right? I mentioned how if you could tap into a dream, right? If you could tap into whether it's like actual dream, it's just some sort of interim state, you could get a lot out of it, right? You could get insights out of it. And by the way that it ends is in the hours of waking light, right? There's almost something like, if you think of a hierarchy, there's something like slightly inferior here about the waking light, right? Perhaps like there's this, if you're so in love or you're so infatuated or whatever, you do want to like, kind of like go to dream. Like I remember like during my childhood infatuations, fucking love going to sleep, right? Because, like you fall asleep, like thinking about this other person, right? Your imagination is going crazy. And I mean, it's a lot of fun, right? And I mean, you're communicating the cleverness and the fun in this song here. I'm not sure if you have anything more to say about that or what, but like I said, some real bangers on this album. I've been listening to a lot the last few days. Do you want to get into ribbons and bows?
Sure. Yeah. That's kind of a funny one because I almost think of it as like a country song a little bit.
Yeah.
Like just in terms of the arrangement and the sound of it. And I've not done too many like that. There's one I released as a single called Secondhand Love, which is also, I think, kind of a country song, but that's like two, right? And in terms of all the songs I've done, there's not many in that way, but this one definitely has that feel. And yeah, it's not really about love. I mean, it's more about appearance and insecurity and who are you doing all these things for? All this enormous menu of personal physical modification that is open to women and kind of pushed at them all the time. Who's it for?
Yeah, I mean, like some of the situations, right, in the song, I actually don't have any specific lyrics here on hand, but basically one of them is like a woman who goes to the doctor, right, and she wants to get plastic surgery on her breast, right? She, the common thing. One thing that immediately stuck out to me, though, is, and I mean, perhaps this is something that is relevant and substantive to like musical tradition in general, but it's especially relevant to like, the contemporary world because here, like the people that are doing good are the men, right? It's the men that are telling these women, what the fuck are you talking about? You don't need surgery. You don't need heels. You don't need to do, this crazy stuff, right? You're fine exactly as you are, right? That by itself, like, just forget, like, even if you literally, like, do not ever read the lyrics, knowing that is the conceit in the song, that structurally you have made a sound artistic decision. And it's a sound artistic decision because it's a different way of viewing things. Right. It's a different kind of it's a different kind of hook. It allows like different kinds of situations to bloom forward in ways that, other structures would sort of, close off. And I mean, it's also like very real in the sense that, like, we often say in the cosmetic orbit that art is not necessarily reality in like a crass sense. It's not truth in the crass sense. Huck Finn has never existed. Those situations had never transpired. But I'm sorry, you could get more understanding of slavery and white-black relations reading Huck Finn than you can reading a lot of, history texts, because Huck Finn is able to capture this undercurrent of reality, right? The fabric of reality, even if the facts are all out of line or completely made up. And one thing here that captures that fabric is, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, or you must have since you put into the song, but women are surprisingly bad at knowing what men want, right? Like, the cliche now is like, men don't know what women want. Well, guess fucking what? Women also don't know what men want. Like, I'm often surprised at the kinds of like insane things that are done, whether it's like, like, for example, like plastic surgery, like no way, like just in any kind of universe that I can imagine, like it is always a turnoff, right? To get like extreme forms of plastic surgery. Or like you see, for example, like, I don't want to get like bitchy and snippy here, but like you sometimes see like women on the train that are, maybe like morbidly obese. And instead of dealing with that, they're spending the entire 45-minute commute, like doing their makeup or doing their hair.
Oh,
Right. Or,
I
or,
know.
or like, like, okay, what if, you have some sort of issue where you can't lose weight? Fine. You could spend that 45 minutes, like, reading a book or some bettering yourself so that you get a partner that's like actually worthwhile. Right. And that would respect these other parts of you that are, more ineffable as opposed to just pure physicality. And here, like, you sort of like, you capture that psychological profile pretty well, right? Like you have the men that are like trying to, tell the women, like, just don't, just don't do this to yourself, right? You're fine as you are. And this actually, this must not be very recent, because, my family's from the USSR, and my great grandmother, right, who was born actually around the time of Lenin, she used to say that when she was younger, she would always put on makeup, and her husband will always say, like, stop it. Why are you putting on makeup? You're just so beautiful the way you are. You're just so beautiful the way you are. But, like, people don't, like, oftentimes, like, between partners, right? People don't want to, this isn't just like a man woman thing. Like both people do it. Like, partners oftentimes don't want to believe the truth that is being imparted by their partners. So they go get it right from somebody else. Like, oh, do you think this? Or like, oh my God, I feel so good. You could have the same conversation, with your husband and your wife that they have later on with a friend. And despite identical conclusions being reached in both conversations, one is taken a little more seriously because of that kind of distance, right? That's one of the kind of like tragedies of life, that closeness breeds certain problems, and distance mitigates others.
Well, yeah, and that's a complicated one, because I mean, your partner is also sometimes a compromised source, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I give to you the classic cliche, honey, do these pants make my butt look big? No, right? Like what are you going to say? You're going to say no, because
Yes.
otherwise, right?
Yes.
So you have to be suspicious sometimes of what your partner tells you,
Yeah.
because they are compromised by proximity and your inability to handle the truth. Right.
Mhm.
So they have to deal with your inability to handle the truth. And everyone has some of that. Some people have much more of it than others. And so if you're one of those people that, doesn't like the answer, but still asks the questions and can't handle it, then your partner may not be giving you always the straight goods, because you've
Yeah.
already taught them that you don't want them. So there's that kind of compromised by proximity thing. But in general, yeah, I mean, I think that men who have any brains, and I'm fortunate to know quite a few of them. I have quite a number of male friends and 5 brothers. So, lots of guys that I spend quality time with, and the ones that are in that circle are all, people with gray matter that works, and they know that, beauty is only skin deep. I mean, you can get a girl who's got all the right curves in all the right places, but if she opens her mouth and nothing interesting comes out, I mean, how much time can you spend with this person?
Mhm.
So automatically, a lot of men know very quickly that, okay, it's nice to look at, but like, is that all? Is that the whole package there? Because we need to have more than that. We need to have skills, and we need to have character qualities, and we need to have intelligence,
Mhm.
and all these other things that make up something that becomes profoundly attractive.
Mhm.
But a lot of women get this idea, and I think it's increasingly common with social media. But your grandmother would have had the same thing, because she would have seen pictures of movie stars, Greta
Mhm.
Garbo or whoever it was, and there are these dramatic lighting, and they've got the makeup just so, and the eyebrows plucked, really, really thin. And there's a certain image, and that's held up as, oh, wow, like universally acknowledged to be a beautiful woman. That is what beautiful is. And so women have this problem where they're like, well, that if that's what beauty is, and that's what men are attracted to, then the more I look like that, the better off I'll be. And it's only part of the truth, right? I mean, that's a beautiful appearance, but that's only part of what constitutes attraction. And you could have a great appearance, but if you're a jerk,
Mhm.
or an idiot, then it's not going to get you that far. But images don't teach us that. And so I think a lot of people, and increasingly now when we're living in an absolutely image saturated culture, on Instagram and so on, we're inundated with the images and like the valuation attached to them. This is beautiful, this is beautiful, this is beautiful, this is desirable. And so it's this very one-dimensional kind of line that women are encouraged to measure themselves against. And so they're putting all this energy and all this focus into that. But as you point out, I mean, if you're morbidly obese, but you're sitting there, working on your eyeshadow,
Mhm.
that's not really your best strategy. Like if you had 10 units of energy to invest in your attractiveness, that's not how they're best spent,
Mhm.
right? So it's just that I think that people are just focused on this really one-dimensional thing, and it's very lopsided. And so there's increasing emphasis on plastic surgery at younger and younger ages. It's kind of ballooning around the world. And then there's this thing about sameness. I mean, students of mine sometimes make jokes about this in Korea, that all the beauty contestants have the same face, because they all go to the same plastic surgeons and they all get the same modifications, and they're trying to fit into this very particular model of what a beautiful face looks like, and they all want to have it.
Mhm.
And so they do, and they look like clones, and,
Yeah,
and
my wife is actually like, I wanted to stay with this for a moment. My wife actually is Korean, and I mean, plastic surgery is like so absolute, so common, right? It's like, this is like a graduation gift that you get,
yeah.
right? Among other things, I remember like one time watching this like Korean show, and then I see like all these like women that look absolutely the same, and then these fat, sloppy ass looking guys that are like, why do these guys get to look sloppy, and they're the presenters, and these women have to look this way. And yeah, but even like staying with some of the more kind of like, even like the skin deep beauty, one thing that's often surprising to me is how often these like conventional images of beauty are at odds with the reality of what people in fact find attractive. Like when I think, for example, of supermodels that are, extremely skinny, oftentimes like skinny fat even, and that doesn't cohere with like what is known biologically in terms of like male attraction, right? I mean, there's the classical, hourglass figure. There's a certain kind of, waist hip ratio that is universally preferable, right? Among pretty much all cultures. And to the extent that it varies, I guess to the extent that sexual selection can play a role in, some like extreme situations. Okay, maybe, but generally speaking, it's more or less the same. But like when I see supermodels, like I just know that this is generally not what men want, right? And why is this like weird, arbitrary, like who made this like odd, arbitrary decision that this is going to be the image that women need to like look up to? Or, conversely, right? We're going to talk about like weightlifting and stuff. Like these like disgusting, like extremely muscle bound guys. Like I've often found it ideal to like what about being like very like wiry and aesthetic and strong, right? As opposed to, because sometimes I'm 5'8", right? So when I see like, okay, what does like a 160-pound bodybuilder looks like? And I'm like, I never want to look like that, right? Being that height, like being that weight. And there's like, certain things you have to avoid. Like you have to like, make sure that you're not eating, that much. You have to like change your workout routine so that you're not really gaining that much muscle. But like all these images just strike me as extremely arbitrary. And in your conversation with Dan, you mentioned that there's this thing that's happening now where girls are increasingly looking to like get plastic surgery like it's no big deal. You see this, for example, like in your students, and it like a lot of it is couched in this like very faux like feminist language. Like I remember one time like my wife like saw something that like I guess fucking annoyed her years ago. So she posted on Facebook about like plastic surgery in Korea. And some woman just like, went on her post and was like, oh, but they should be allowed to do that if they want, right? It's no problem if they do it. Want right. And
You're
they
worth
do
it.
yeah. As if like this is some sort of like, it's like this like faux feminism that has absolutely nothing to do with reality, has nothing absolutely to do with any kind of empowerment, right? It all goes and it's so anyway, and also like it seems like the people that are slightly older, like the millennials and above, they're kind of going along with it because they're scared, right? Like they're scared to push back against it. They're scared to push back against some of these like faux, I say feminist and scare codes because it's not actually feminism, these kinds of narratives. And it's kind of like imagine like, millennials that are like 35, they have kids and they're essentially allowing this like younger generation, their own kids, to more or less just go completely wild, right? Believe what they want to believe and say, it's okay. Partly because, maybe they grew up with some of these kinds of dysfunctions as well, right? In some ways. But I mean, it's an interesting kind of dynamic to see happening.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that it's got nothing to do with feminism. And here I'm going to, get into the contested terrain where people like Margaret Atwood and J.P. Rowlands have been strung up for not being feminist enough for some people who want to define the term in their own way. So let me just begin by saying that feminism is a great big term, like an umbrella, and there are many people underneath it who totally disagree with each other about everything. So let's just start there. Mm-hmm. So when I say feminism, what I mean is recognizing the full humanity of women and girls and their human potential. And that means their intelligence and their talent and their capacity to contribute to the world. And none of that has got to do with appearance. Zero. Mm-hmm. And when I see people defining feminism as like, slut walk, it's my right to walk down the street wearing no top at all and the shortest miniskirt that I can find and stripper heels and don't sexualize my body, and I'm like, women have always been sexual objects. Mm-hmm. And women have always been kind of reduced to their appearance and their reproductive function. That's not going anywhere. We don't mm-hmm. need to lift that up and protect it. Like that's just going to be always there. And so saying that feminism is focusing on your sexual attractiveness and this plastic surgery and your ability to kind of go out and basically look like a sex object as wearing as little clothing as possible strikes me as actually the opposite, because you're voluntarily reducing yourself to a slab of meat. Mm-hmm. Like when you go out like that, nobody is thinking about the fact that you might have a brain. No one is thinking about the fact that you might have any skills or anything intelligent to say, because you've voluntarily reduced yourself to the sum of your sexual parts, and that's what you're kind of displaying as much of as possible. So that sort of fills the consciousness and focus of anyone who's looking at you, because look, is that a nipple hanging out? I mm-hmm. mean, can we see the color of your underwear? Oh my goodness. Like you're forcing people to focus on that because that's what you're kind of loudly displaying. And that's not liberation. Mm-hmm. I mean, back in the day when we were talking about ancient history, slave girls were sold naked. Yes, they were, so that you could see right there the sum of the sexual parts that you were getting. It's incredibly demeaning. Women who had rank and respect wore clothes because they had a status that was more than just, your sex appeal. You had a position in society. You had responsibilities. And yes, they were nowhere near the range of potentials that is now available to women in some parts of the world. But when I see liberation as just focusing on, my right to kind of stick my breasts and my nipples in your face, I think that there's something serious that's been lost there, and that you're actually just reproducing the same repression that women have been subject to all the time, which is that people just see them as sex objects and reproductive machines. And there's been such a long fight to be seen as human beings with far greater capacities than that. We have those things, but we have more than that. We'd like that to be recognized once in a while. I mean, Hedy Lamarr, who was an old Hollywood screen siren, she was thought of as the most beautiful woman in the world, in American Hollywood circles. She was absolutely brilliant. Technically, she developed a technology, I was reading this past week, that's responsible for the development of Wi-Fi. But she was going through her entire life being reduced to a pretty face that sold movies, and no one recognized or praised the fact that she had so much going on between her ears. And so when I think about feminism, I think about recognizing women's full capacities and potential and ability to contribute. And I think that encouraging them to do that, encouraging women and girls to cultivate those abilities, because your physical attractiveness has got an end date, and it's not a very long one. It's got a shelf life. So if you're going to spend all your time worried about lash extensions and nails and like wardrobe, you're going to spend a large portion of your life feeling valueless when that shelf life kind of diminishes, and no one wants to see you flash your tits in their face anymore.
Yeah.
Then what? What have you got then?
I definitely agree with your conception of feminism, and obviously with like what's the most substantive. To push back just slightly, though, I will say that there's definitely still a strain. I'm not sure if you notice this. Maybe men in the company of women, they definitely do behave differently. Like when I'm hanging out with my neighbors and they're like all guys, if like one of their wives comes out, my wife comes out, like suddenly if they're misbehaving, they're like, like everything goes silent, like they don't want to act out. And that's the thing, like people really underrate, right, how much, women have had like a domesticating effect on men. But anyway, there's definitely this like undercurrent in lots of men. I think, in fact, this is very normal that, they still have like so many kind of like sexual hangups about their partners. I agree that stuff like, a slut walk is like very silly, but I view that as an overcorrection in the same way that we have so many other like overcorrections in liberal culture, right? We have like political correctness. We have all sorts of stuff that is just this hyper overcorrection. And what it's overcorrecting for is the fact that men have these hangups. Like every once in a while, if I want to be entertained, like I check out like, the relationship subreddit, or I see what people are saying on like the sex subreddit. Like, let me see what these fuckheads are up to. And like, you wouldn't believe how many posts there are like, oh, there's this girl that I wanted to marry, but like, she just told me that she had a threesome with 2 guys before we met and I can't fucking marry. Like a lot of people still think that way, right? And lots of people men can't get over it in terms of like of their own selves. And there's also this like shame that women feel as well. So I definitely understand the overcorrection, but we also have to recognize that in fact it is an overcorrection, right? We don't want the pendulum to swing all the way in the other direction, because that, an overcorrection by definition is not a correction. It creates its own problems as it goes along.
Exactly. Agreed.
All right. So it's actually been 90 minutes. It's hard to believe. And we still have 2 songs on the first album to get through before we even get to anything else. So
deadlifts. And
we also had T.S. Eliot. Honestly, I'm not sure if this is going to happen. Maybe we'd have to like do a standalone thing on it. But anyway, so you have this other song, They Say. It's similar to Traces of You in the sense that there's also this kind of like, Cole Porter quality. There's a ton of cleverness. And when Dan was talking about the song in your interview with him, he said something like the also like before you even like read the lyrics, if you simply know that the narrator is not talking about being in love, she's talking about other people discussing her appearance as she's in love, her behaviors when she's in love. Like that's also a clever, right? Perhaps even like, you know, somewhat counterintuitive in to the art. And there's this like my favorite part of the song is near the end where the narrator says, had my neighbor's child sitting on my knee. She was asking about that man and me. I said, he's just a friend. But then she called my bluff. She said, do you mean that man you love? Right. And you know, it's kind of like, you know, it's playing off of this fact that sometimes kids are very perceptive, but also just artistically, you keep trying to avoid using the word love in the song.
Yeah.
And finally it comes out, right? But it's coming through the mouth of this child, right? And it's so kind of like, you know, like matter of fact, and it's there. It's like, oh, do you mean that man that you love? Kind of like casual, like, well, yeah, of course. Of course you love him. This was never a question, right? And the only one that's questioning it, the only one that's trying to put up fronts is the narrator, right? As a singer, right? So, I mean, very clever stuff you got going on. So, okay, last song, I think it's maybe my favorite, Saying Goodbye. It does this thing where I've heard songs before where like, you know, people are singing about death or perhaps fearing death or like sadness related to like, you know, somebody's passing. And in this song, like you seem to be like tapping into that a little bit, but very quickly it enters back into the love tradition, right? When I said earlier that, you know, in the macro, you're dealing with love, but you're constantly refracting it in certain ways. You're turning away from it in certain ways. You're letting it in other ways. And there's a lot of kind of, you know, give and take. And you have the same thing here, right? Like like it starts, for example, with, when my time to go comes, I'll miss the rain that falls on the earth and greens it again. I'll miss the wellspring that makes everything new, but I don't know how to say goodbye to you. Right. And I mean, this is well written because, right. Well, besides like the individual lines, which are also clever, the images of the rain and the greeting of the earth are memorable, right? They stick with you, right? This is, even when I forget how the song sounds like or whatever, I still have those images stick in my head. It does like reintroduce love. Like you're thinking, okay, is this going to be a song about something completely different? But in a way that's completely unexpected, you bring, you know, love back into it. Which is also very well done and clever. Well, I'm done with this album. I'm not sure if you want to talk about this song or maybe something else on it, or anything related to that before we move on.
Yeah, no, just that song is one of my favorites that I've ever written. And it started when I was actually running. I was out for a run, and that was when these lyrics started coming, because the beauty of the natural world is profound, and it's something that that I appreciate every day. And I'm lucky enough to live in a place where there's a lot of access to it. Like I don't live in a concrete jungle. There's an orchard across the road, and every time I get into my car, I look down the road and I just see these blue mountains looming on the horizon, and they're close enough to touch. I mean, I go out there and I touch them very regularly. So it comes from a profound sense of the beauty of these things, and the feeling of privilege to be there to witness them and to appreciate them. And there was one minor correction. It's I miss the way spring makes everything new.
Oh, okay.
Minor detail,
Yeah.
close enough. But yeah, I mean, all these things are beautiful, and yet you know that eventually you'll have to leave them behind, and intellectually you can accept that. But then there are those things that are harder to accept, and so yeah, it's Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, but a little more than that.
Yeah, it's not only unexpected in the sense that, love seems to come out of nowhere, but you also don't do this thing. Like, I feel like, okay, so if someone is clever enough to get past the point of like, doing a purely conventional love song, and they bring love into it, right, through this kind of they will probably, though, fail at the point where they end up doing something like, oh, and our love will endure. Like, everything is going to die, but our love will remain. But you explicitly, not only do you not do that, you reject that, right? You seem to be kind of like saying that, not only will I die, you will die. And in fact, we might not get any kind of closure about this, right? We might not be able to communicate, right, our fears here, our sadness. We might have to be purely okay with leaving things as they are, right? So, like, I feel like you have like so many kind of landmines that you could step on, and you expertly, navigate around them, and you don't step on them because, like with any kind of artwork, right? Like you sort of, you kind of oftentimes create your own kind of pitfalls, right? But I mean, this avoids it very, very well. So I guess we could talk about the next album. I had 3 songs to talk about, but there are also some like questions leading up to it. So I guess the best way to tackle this is, so you had this album in 2017, you have this next album in 2019. Do you feel across these couple of years that you improved as an artist? And if so, like what does artistic improvement look like to you? What are the value judgments that you're making? How do you know that these are the correct value judgments to take? And also, how do you know that these are, even the right questions to ask before you start, giving these value judgments?
Yeah, that's a challenging question because having
It should be. You're an
perspective,
artifact.
yeah, having perspective on your own work is an inherently hazardous activity, you know. Because on one hand, you're kind of emotionally connected to it because you invested your energy into it and it's your thing. But having an objective ability to evaluate where it stands in terms of what is the current, to what extent have you achieved your goals, and to what extent have you achieved the ability to communicate, and where does it rank in relationship to other things that you admire and that you're shooting for? So there are a number of ways that one could judge improvement as an artist, because it's a big package, right? I'm working, for example, on my skills as a vocalist. When I started this, thing in music, I thought of myself primarily as a songwriter, not a singer at first. I'd only just managed to get the idea into my head that I could write songs and melodies. And, being skillful as a vocalist was very new. And I thought, well, I guess I have to sing because who else is going to sing these songs? If I don't sing them, who's going to deliver them? So I need to work on that. That's an ongoing process. And so have I improved in that way? I think so, yes. How do I know? Well, there are some objective measurements. You can talk about being able to sustain sound and the quality of that sound. You can talk about range, all these sorts of things. So I can find objective measurements of improvement in, say, that subset of being a vocalist.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of being like a songwriter, I had a sense with this most recent album that there were at least a couple of tracks that brushed the hem of the dream that I have when it comes to music. And that dream is to be able to make music like Chet Baker. That's something that becomes canonical. So something that people want to turn on and listen to again and again because it creates that mood, because it becomes a vehicle for their own emotions and experience, because it communicates something about the human condition that they can relate to, and that they can invest their own experiences and their emotions into the experience of that music, and it becomes personal to them. And we've all got those songs, that kind of speak to us in those ways, and we wrap them in our own experiences, and they become part of us in the way that great poetry does as well, right? So I was aiming at that Chet Baker feeling, and there were a couple of songs that, you do the best you can to write the song, to sing it, to write the music and the lyrics, and you have an idea in your head of how you want to arrange it, but you still got to bring it into the studio. And then it's subject to this whole process where other people are involved. And what they bring to that is it's going to propel it, and it's going to grow in some direction. It may not be the direction you had in mind. It may still be a good direction, but you don't really know what it's going to look like when you take that song and you put it into that studio production process where other musicians hear what you're doing and they bring their own thing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And either the thing that they bring is congruent with a vision that works, or it's not. And I've seen examples of both, fortunately more in the former category than the latter. But on this occasion, I brought in these two songs in particular, and I had a very specific sense of the emotional tone that they needed to have, and the feel that needed to be communicated to the listener. And to watch that come out in the room and to listen to it afterwards, literally dozens and dozens and dozens of times in various stages, and to feel that, yes, that feels exactly the way that it should. And then you try. So that's your subjective judgment, right? Does it feel the way I think it should in my head? That's question one. But question two is, okay, now that we got that, where does it stand when I listen to that song in the company of other songs that I admire? Can it partake of the same air, or is it, still far off? And I hope that with those couple of tracks, at least, that it begins to edge into that particular altitude that I'm aiming for. Whether it does or not, ultimately will be decided by the listener. That there are some things that you can't ultimately know. You can do the best you can and shoot at that mark, but whether you've landed there will be decided by your audience.
Does that make you feel like kind of crazy? Like the fact that you have to give up a significant amount of control to like someone else's points of views and visions? Because I feel like very lucky that, of all the kind of art forms I could have stumbled into, like for me, it's writing, which is like so solitary, right? I could just like avoid people and things and just do whatever I want to do. Do you have instances of like failures in the sense that people are just doing something that you want nothing to do with, or what?
So I have to understand, is your question about the other people that contribute to the making of the art, or is it about the audience after the fact? Because those are two different things.
Well, yeah, the people that are creating it with you, like, do you feel like they're either stepping on your toes sometimes, or like they're not getting it, or like something like that?
All of those things can happen. So, yeah. Finding a good producer to work with is kind of the single most important thing, because that producer is like the team leader. Like I take my songs to a producer and I say, this is my project, this is what I want to make. And then it's his job to actually construct the sound files that are supposed to approximate that vision, and then to pick the session musicians that he thinks are going to be able to bring that feel to the project. So if you pick the wrong producer, like if I was trying to make a jazz album and I went to an amazing producer who did all kinds of country albums, that would be a stupid thing to do, because the vibe, the palette of tools that he is working with are in a particular genre, and it's not mine. So if I'm saying, here, take your tools that are super specialized for a country sound and make a totally different thing, it's probably not going to work, So you have to find someone who understands and likes to work in that palette of colors, if you like, and then has that sensibility. And then if they do, then they will draw on their own network of musicians to say, I know 5 horn players, but the one we want for this project is this guy, because they understand the sound you're going for and they're able to make those decisions. So I've been fortunate to have found such a guy. He did the Hot Damn Romance album. He produced it, and he's producing this one that's coming out now. But he picked an absolutely brilliant piano player by the name of Stephen Gardner, and a wonderful drummer called Charlie Ringus. And these two guys were incredibly professional, incredibly skillful, and really good at coming out with the jazz sound. And they were also totally dedicated to getting the sound that we wanted. They didn't bring their own kind of, ego or preconceptions in there and say, well, I'm just going to play this drum track and it's brilliant. What do you mean you don't like it? This is my brilliant drum track. Well, it might be, but it's not the song that we're looking for. So all kinds of things can go wrong. People can have different styles. They can have enormous egos, all kinds of things. But we were really lucky on this occasion that the producer was exactly the man, and he picked some people who were very skillful and really good at bringing the best. So watching these songs literally like blossom like flowers in front of me in the studio in real time was an almost magical experience.
Yeah.
And that's got everything to do with the people who I was privileged to work with. So fortunate.
Yeah. I'm not sure how rare that is, but I mean, I'm glad that it worked out that way. There's this song in Hot Damn Romance that I'm not sure if you agree with my assessment, but I think by far the best song on that album is Water, right? And I'm just pulling up the lyrics. So Water is the song. I mean, like, first of all, do you agree that it's the best song on the album, or what?
I really like that song. I mean, it's hard to ask someone who writes songs like, what's your favorite one? Because it's like, well, they're all my children, right? But that song stands out as very different from all the others. And it was a beautiful surprise to hear how it came out. But it's certainly one of my favorites to sing, and the feel of it emotionally. So yeah, I'm very fond of it.
So I have the lyrics here, and I'm just going to read. It's not too long, right? So I'm going to read all the lyrics. And the reason why I'm doing this is I feel like some casual listeners, let's call them normies, might say, well, Eva Schubert has a ton of cliches here. And I'm wondering how you would respond to some of those charges. And I think you'd be able to pick up on some of the lines that I'm talking about. Not that I necessarily agree with that argument, but I want to see, without me like giving you my own input, like how would you, I don't want to say defend yourself, right? It sounds very adversarial, but let's say that artists are competitive. How would you defend yourself in this situation? So Water. I need your lips like water. I crave your touch like bread. And every day I hunger, no matter how much I've been fed. And I don't like to admit it, because I've been proud to walk alone. But life's another color than anything I've ever known. Here we stand in clouds of stardust with all the things we can't explain. But you make me believe in miracles again. I've heard rumors on the water, all the wrecks with love to blame. Maybe what's between us should have another name. I need your lips like water. I crave your touch like bread. And every day I hunger, no matter how much I've been fed. I like that you have this like dreamy look on your face as I read the lyrics.
It puts me into a certain like mental state, which is the one it came out of, right? So I think that bread and water are often used as images. So you could accuse those of being cliche, in the sense that I mean, Neruda has done it. Lots of other people have done it. I even played with it on a previous song called Bread and Chocolate. I was talking about, things that you want, things that you need, nutritionally, as metaphors for love. But I think that this song doesn't just stick with one image and kind of unpack it in 5 different ways. Water runs through it, and so you've got the water that you drink, but you've also got the water of the ocean and shipwrecks, and then you have the idea of clouds of stardust and sort of space. And so while bread and water you've heard before, you haven't necessarily heard it as part of this larger, almost triptych of images that are being used here to explain what's going on. So that would be my defense. And I will say that the Clouds of Stardust bit is my favorite bit poetically, but that's just a personal subjective thing.
Yeah, that's the next thing that I want to focus. So, like, here we stand in clouds of stardust with all the things we can't explain, but you make me believe in miracles again. Now, I think some people like would make the argument that, but you make me believe in miracles again, as just kind of like, generic kind of like trope thing that you find in all sorts of love songs. But well, actually, like what would before I give my argument as to why it's not a cliche, what would your argument be?
I think that there's a tendency to reduce love to materialistic functions, and I've seen writing on this to talk about, well, love is just a cocktail of hormones that are released in the brain, and it's sort of a series of physiological inputs and outputs and whatever. And so if the external conditions are right and you get the right combination of dopamine and serotonin and blah, 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 then you're going to experience this state that we call love, but it's really just a product of biochemistry, and you could probably make it in the lab. If we studied a little more, we could probably get the right cocktail and just reproduce that feeling in someone's brain. And so that stanza is basically saying, well, it's true that science gives us this conceit that we can reduce everything to explicable material functions. And that's kind of the conceit of that way of knowing. And I have no quarrel with science. I'm not one of these woo-woo people who thinks that, Western science is a crock and we should get rid of it and go with our gut. That's not what I'm saying. It's very important. But there's a tendency to want to be able to reduce everything to these physical functions. And what I'm saying is that there are some things that are more than the sum of their physical parts. There are some things that can't necessarily be reduced to the right number of hormones and atoms. And there's a magic, if you like, that happens that supersedes the sum of the physical parts. And that's what I mean by miracles. It's those things that we can't explain. We can explain lots of things and we can analyze things, but there are some things that are beyond our grasp and that have this quality of magic because even if we can count all the physical parts, they don't quite account for that experience. And I think that love is one of those things. And that's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, love and negative capability. And actually, that would have been my argument as well. The way that I would phrase it is, unlike most songs that would invoke, like, you make me believe in miracles again, what you're saying here is literally, you make me believe in miracles again, literally, right? And oftentimes when you have cliches, people tend to forget like what's underneath some of these words, like some cliches and some idioms. Like when you really think about them, they're often like really clever, or like something like crazy as a bed bug. I just find that so funny. And there's a ton of stuff like that. But here, the transition into the literalness like is what makes it work. It also means this next stanza is wonderful. I've heard rumors on the water, all the wrecks with love to blame. Maybe what's between us should have another name. Again, that kind of like refraction, right? Turning away slightly from love. But yeah, I definitely think this is the best song on the album. And it's one of my favorite songs from you, for the singing, the musical background, and, all the tons and tons of like inversions of like line to line inversions, inversions of tropes. Anyway, look, it's been 2 hours, which was a lot of time, but I got to ask you, like, do you really have to like fucking go? Like, what do you got to do? You're going to go make money? Is that what you got to do? You got to go work?
No, I've got to go make dinner.
Oh, yeah. Well, the way that I work around that is like on days when I'm recording, my wife and I have a fend for self, right? So I just have like a bottle of kefir, and that's it. That's dinner, right? A lot of people say like, oh man, how are you supposed to lose weight? Wake up, have a fucking glass of juice, have a protein bar, eat 12 hours later, right? That's the easiest way.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think it would be a terrible thing if we had this conversation and didn't talk about deadlifting.
Yeah.
So it's 4:57 over here. So I'm going to say we've got 17 minutes to cover physical training. Go.
Okay. So, so you're well, maybe you can't tell so easily around from the video that you're into fitness. If you decide to ever bless the audience and flex your upper back, they would change their minds. But you are very into fitness, right? You hike a lot. When I go on vacations, like one of the main things is like almost every vacation that I take now is like there's like a huge either hiking component or walking component. When I went to Amsterdam, it was specifically let's find a place where we could just walk for hours, right? Don't have to take public transit. Montreal, I love Montreal because it's so walkable, right? Hours and hours. So like when did you get into fitness, like, and what specifically made it stick, you know, as you got older? Because I feel like a lot of people that are sort of into fitness vaguely, let's say, they sort of fall out of it pretty fast.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to have that early physical discipline of classical ballet pretty much from the age of 3 until the age of 12. And that was the first time that I had that feeling of like sitting on a bench after a workout and having your muscles involuntarily shake. You know, like I remember the legs shaking, and I was like, "What's going on?" And it's because that's what happens when you use your muscles up.
It feels good, right?
It does feel good, and so being exposed to that as kind of a regular part of my weekly routine was a great gift. So when we had to quit when I was 12 because it was expensive and there were more and more children happening in the family. So there was less money to go around. And, puberty happened like, the next year. And I began to be really concerned. I was like, oh my goodness, there's all kinds of things happening in strange ways, soft body parts moving around. And I began to be concerned about losing fitness. So between 13 and 14, I joined a gym, which was easy to do because I looked several years older than I was. I could easily pass for 15, 16. So started that, and that became kind of a benchmark. But I would read men's muscle magazines for lifting workouts because I very quickly discovered, I tried 1 or 2 female ones, and they were like, oh, you can get a Campbell soup can and do bicep curls. I was like, are you kidding me? So you'd get like Men's Health and Fitness or something, and they'd be like, okay, delts. This is how you do delts. And so, this was like me, teenage Eva is like 14, 15, reading the guys' muscle mags and taking those workouts in and doing them. But what I discovered as I kind of went along with it was, at the very beginning, when I was a adolescent, you're worried about your body changing and you're worried about getting soft and all this. But as I got on, it became as much of an internal thing as an external one. And what I mean by that is physical fitness. Yes, it's keeping your body healthy. And yes, there's an aesthetic component, of course, which is great for confidence and everything else. But it's also a daily training in discipline. And that's a character trait.
Yeah.
And that's something that is highly transferable because training for me happens 5 days a week. And it happens whether I feel like it or not. Right. And I always say to people when they ask me, oh, how do you stick with it? I'm like, well, first of all, never ask yourself, do I feel like training today? It's the wrong question. Training is scheduled. You get out of bed, you put on your training clothes and you train. And it's a checklist item like brushing your teeth or anything else. How you feel about it doesn't matter. But there are definitely days when you don't feel like it. And so doing it anyway teaches you things that you would otherwise not know. It teaches you that actually you usually have the capacity, even when the voice of weakness in your brain is telling you that today is a good day to be, take an off day and rest and take it easy. No, it's not. Today is not the day to give in to the voice of weakness.
Do you notice that if in fact you do take a day off, the day after, it's like, oh, maybe this day as well, right? It starts this kind of, chain reaction, right? Yeah, and so like when I was young, I was always overweight as a kid. By the time I was a teenager, I was morbidly obese. Although ironically, I was still kind of active. Like I remember when I was 13, I had this. I guess it's a fairly common knee condition in kids who are active, where their quads actually grow faster than their bones. So I still have this thing you see in my knee where it's kind of like jutting out. Right. It was very painful for about a week. Then it just sort of goes away. Pretty common. But by the time I became like 19 years old, I stepped in the scale. I was shocked to find that here I was, like, I probably wasn't even 5'8" at that point. I was probably like 5'7" at that point. And I was like 220 pounds. And I was like, oh, fuck, like, this is unbelievable. How did this happen? And I was in so much body pain, right? Like I couldn't walk for more than a few minutes without back pain. I couldn't sit. I was in college, and I remember just like dreaming of like going home so I could just lie down. And then like being on the train, standing like around all these people, thinking like, fuck, like I wish I could get a seat. I just can't stand this, hurts so much. And I was looking up like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Like the first thing was like, how am I supposed to deal with this back pain? Right. Because one thing I learned very early on is that physical therapists are fucking worthless. Like physical therapy is like Stone Age level of knowledge. Same thing with like nutrition and physical therapy. So many people don't know, like even if you're like trained in it, like there's just so much, misinformation. And a lot of it is just trial and error. Like if you have injuries, if you have problems, you have to try a ton of different things before you find what actually works for you. But I also strongly believe that, for any kind of like physical ailment like that anybody might have, there definitely is some sort of combination of movements, whether it's weights, whether it's unweighted, that you could do to bring you out of pain. I know because I had everything from back pain to, if you want to think of tendonitis, imagine triceps tendonitis. Nobody gets that shit, right? And like, how do you like work like knee pain? I remember at some point, this is even after deadlifting, I had so much knee pain if I were to like run more than like 1 minute. And it was so psychologically damaging in the sense that like I would constantly think like, well, fuck, what if I'm walking on the street and for whatever reason I just have to run? Am I literally unable to do so? I went to like so many physical therapists. I tried so many different things. My gym actually is in that open door behind me. And after I moved into this house and I built it, I was like, all right, the one thing I haven't tried for my knees, let me try it. Front squats, because back squats didn't work. Thousands of body weight squats didn't work. Miles and miles of walking didn't work. And I wasn't expecting this to work, but first front squat that I did, not only was there no pain, I had no pain the next day. And I figured out, oh shit, there's something specific about this exercise that whatever's going on with my knees, this corrects it. And, at this point, I don't have any problems like that anymore. But deadlifting, like when I discovered it, I was reading this book by Pavel Tsutsouline, right? He's this like Russian trainer who introduced kettlebells and deadlifting, I think, to Americans. And he has this like, USSR, like I'm a Soviet trainer shtick, right? And you'd think like, oh, this must be like shit information, but he had great information. But that book, Power to the People, is still one of the best physical training books on the planet. Even if it's written in a way that's kind of like, kitschy or whatever, it's really good. And I remember like within the first few months of doing it, like my back pain, not only did my pain go away, within a year, I was walking down the street and just like thinking literally, holy shit, I can't imagine anyone feeling stronger and healthier than I feel right now. And compared to what things were for me 2 years ago, like it was just unbelievable. So, I mean, since that point, like right now I have like very specific routines. Whenever I wake up, first thing I do, I take a walk around a pond. It's a 3-mile walk. I take like another, I try to walk up to like 10 miles a day. And I do that like before lifting weights, deadlifts, front squats, Turkish Get Ups. I love Turkish Get Ups. Like I still get times when I feel kind of lazy, but even like days when I'm lazy, since I have body pain that will return if I don't do various stretches and different things. I don't ever feel like I'm slacking off if I decide not to do weights. But if I really want to do weights and I feel like just too out of it, you could do like a 30-minute Turkish Get Up routine where like I mean, think about it. First of all, with that motion, you're getting if you're doing 30 minutes, you're getting some kind of cardio, but it's also very meditative and yoga-like because it's the same like movement back and forth. Like you're doing a kind of balancing act. You're working on your core in ways that you don't like. Even if you lift weights, like a Turkish Get Up, hit your core in angles that you simply will never get. Right, doing something like even like a front squat, right, or a deadlift. Anyway, I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that or what, or like specifically also like have you dealt with injuries? Like what are your experience with things like that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of an exact parallel to that because shortly after I started my career in the gym, around 13 or 14, I discovered this pain that was happening to me, and it wasn't the good kind of pain. You know,
Yeah.
I divide pain quite distinctly between good pain and bad pain. And good pain is constructive and voluntary, and bad pain is destructive and involuntary. So it was bad pain, and it was basically shooting through my right glute.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it would
No, I've
happen
got
like
that. Yeah.
the day
Yeah.
after a workout, and I was like, what's going on? And then it sometimes happened on my left glute, although that took a while for that to happen. And this pain would be kind of recurrent on a semi-regular basis, and it would range in intensity from like a 2, where it's kind of like a dull ache, to there was one episode I had where it was at a 10, where it was spasming so badly that I could not walk on that occasion. And that was terrifying. So this started when I was about 14, and it persisted into my late 20s. So a
Oh
long
shit.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that, I was like, and I saw doctors, and I saw physiotherapists, and I saw massage
And
therapists.
they can't say shit. They don't
Nothing.
know shit. They don't know anything.
Nothing. There was lots of prodding, prodding of that area. Thanks for that. But it didn't really do anything. So then I met someone who was really into martial arts and had a long history of injuries and things himself that he'd kind of gotten over. And he said, there's definitely an answer to this. We need to see a new doctor, just, whatever. And he kind of pushed me to take it seriously, because I'd sort of given up and thought, well, this is just a feature of my life now, and I have to work around it. And I saw this doctor, and this doctor was like, oh, you're just one of the 20% of the population that has your sciatic nerve bisecting your glute. So when your glutes get tight, it just applies pressure on that sciatic nerve, which is really quite painful. Answer, stretch your glutes like this. And since I've been doing that stretch, I have never had an episode again.
Yeah.
But that was something that dogged my life for like 15 years.
Yeah. That multi-year injury, like, well, for me, like I'm lucky, like my knees were only 4 years, but knees are also very kind of significant in that sense, right? And just like literally trying like hundreds of hours of all sorts of things that people prescribe, things and also like when you find stuff on the internet, like I'm sure now in retrospect, when you look back to some of those like muscle mags they used to read, also a whole lot of bullshit, isn't there? A lot of shit that, but like it's going to take, I feel like, another century for nutrition and physical therapy to be fully resolved. But I strongly believe that there's always a way out of like, even like the worst kind of situation like this. I have books by Stu McGill. You ever heard this name?
Yes, exactly. So he's helped so many people out of lifelong crippling back pain. He's an expert. I mean, he's devoted his entire life as a medical doctor to the human back and how it works. He's amazing. So anyone who's listening to this who has any kind of back trouble should definitely read Stuart McGill's book.
The best, like most comprehensive book here is A Back Mechanic by Stu McGill. And I ever since I discovered those exercises, he calls it the big three. I do them after my walk. It's the first thing I do when I get back. Before I do sit down to record something like this, I do the big three, and it cements your back in a way where you don't get the pains from sitting. Like it's not that you don't get it, period. If you sit for like 10 hours without moving, yes, you're going to come back, but it expands that window of being pain-free. And like, for example, like I know enough about myself that now after we finish talking, I'm going to go on like an hour walk, around the pond or whatever. And that, I don't have any discomfort now, but that's going to prevent any discomfort from popping up tomorrow. Because tomorrow is a weight day. Yeah. So, and also like the way that I think of things like stretching and walking is those are the things that fuel the stuff that I really love to do which is the weightlifting, right?
Yeah.
If you but you have to do the stretching, you have to do that kind of like rehab, whatever, in order for you to smoothly do those other things. Right. So, and it's this kind of give and take, but, Anyway, like one last thing, I don't have it here, but I showed this before. Like I'm a big supplement freak. I have like a metal tin like this that I fill twice a day with pills. It's literally like this tall, right? And it's still like flowing out. That's kind of like a crazier thing compared to like even people into supplements. But like, are you a supplement freak, or is that like only me? Because I haven't met many supplement freaks except for the ones that I turn on to supplements.
I have experimented with various things in the past. I discovered that I was allergic to some kind of binding or filling ingredients that are in a lot of vitamins. So then I didn't take as many of them. But I mean, there are things that I need to take. I need to supplement my diet with iron. There's the barbell kind and there's the pill kind, but I need both of them. But one of the things I love about deadlifting, because I'm going to go there because I love it, is that it keeps you honest.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about exercise and like the long term, and people talk about keeping fit, but when you say keeping fit, what exactly is it you're keeping? Because unless you've got an objective measurement of some fitness thing that you can do, you don't know if you've kept it or not. And we're really great at lying to ourselves, right? Like you go for a run and you're like, oh yeah, I'm as fast as I ever was. No, you're probably not. But unless you were keeping track of your times for the 5K or the 10K, you've got no way of judging whether what you're doing tomorrow is better, worse, or wherever relative to what you did 4 years ago, for example. And the thing about deadlifting is that it's such a whole body movement. And so it's very satisfying, but it also keeps you really honest. Like you can't fudge it. Either you get that weight off the ground or you don't.
Yeah.
And it's a big number, so it requires complete focus. Like there are people who can do bicep, curls like this, and they're kind of, off thinking about something else. But if you try and do that with a deadlift, you're going to cause some serious damage to yourself. Yeah. You can't. It demands total focus. And you're going to know if you got that off the ground or not. And you're going to know if you made some mistakes in your form while you did it. And so I think that it really keeps you honest in terms of where you're at and where you need to go. And the thing is, a lot of people just when you say weightlifting, they think of those like steroid monkeys, guys that are like roided out and their veins are popping out everywhere. And they're like, and women are worse for that. They're like, oh, weightlifting will make me look like that. I'm like,
or I remember one woman told me like, it's going to make me sweat. It's going to make me sweat.
Oh my God. Okay. What I say to people is, if you weren't sweating, you didn't have a good time. Okay. Yeah. Anything good in life involves sweating.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So embrace it. It's a good sign. If you got a problem with breaking a sweat, you got a problem with living, honey. I mean, I have no time for that. So, sweat and sometimes blood and sometimes tears. I mean, all of these are type 1, type 2, and type 3 fun. You just have to kind of go with it. Yeah. But a good, honest sweat is an important thing. And it's actually something that comes up in a song on the next album, but we'll talk about that one later.
Yeah. One quick last question about deadlifting. So, I mean, I was trained by this one woman. She was like 56 at the time, power lifter, still setting records at that time. This was a while ago. But she's like genetically gifted, right? Then I looked though at people like Paolo Tussolini, and he's like, okay, well, he introduced deadlifts. He has, my kind of like physique in the sense that he's not that tall. He's kind of skinny. He never wanted to put on a lot of weight. He just wanted to be strong. But I heard this interview that he did with Joe Rogan like a year ago, and he's in his 50s now, and he's like, I don't deadlift anymore. It's just not really good for my body anymore. Like he could do like kettlebell swings, but he can't do deadlifts. And it just made me think like, okay, like, deadlifts have always been sold like by some people, at least, as like, oh, grandma got back pain, put her on a diet of deadlifts. And I don't think that's very realistic. And it makes me think like, how long can the average person that doesn't have like true genetic gifts, how long can they go with something like a deadlift? And when they have to eventually stop, like, what does that look like? Does that look like, okay, I've been doing it the last few months and it just makes me feel so weathered and worn down? Or does it come in the form of like a catastrophic injury, right? That's what I'm thinking now. Because, I'm going to be 34 at the end of this week. And most people my age, they no longer lift weights. They definitely no longer deadlift. They don't do a lot of shit. And, it's eventually going to be my time too. Do you ever think about like, in what form is that going to take? Like, when will you have to part with this like favorite activity, you know? Because honestly, like,
No,
like when it happens, like it's gonna be so sad.
like honestly, I am so committed to fitness as a way of life, as an expression of kind of personal grit and discipline, that I see myself doing it in whatever form is possible until I drop dead. Like I would
Yeah.
prefer to drop dead under a barbell. Thank you very much. That's how I'd like to go out. So if there's something physiological that happens at some point where it's like, no, the deadlift is not working, there are kettlebells, there are
Hmm.
dumbbells, there are all kinds of other things you can be doing. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for goodness sakes, there's footage of her in the gym in the last few years of her life. Was she deadlifting heavy weights? No, but she was in the gym and she
Hmm.
was working on her muscles. And I think that being able to be there at that point in your life has a lot to do with everything you put in up to that point. Because
Hmm.
don't kid yourself. If you throw in the towel at, 37 and you're like, oh, well, I've got kids and I've got saddlebags and I got no time for fitness and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's fine. 20 or 30 years of getting ever more decrepit.
Hmm.
Okay. Because if you don't lose it, it goes away. So you put on the weight, you lose your muscle mass, then you start having joint pains and all those good things we've already talked about. Are you going to be in the state physically or mentally to be in the gym working out when you're 68? No, probably not. In fact, you might already be dead by then, or you're probably diabetic. You've probably got a whole range of other issues that were exacerbated by a lack of maintenance, a lack of prevention, a lack of nutrition, all these things. So if it's a lifelong commitment, if it's a lifestyle, it's not about the aesthetic. Okay, I mean, everyone's going to get old, everyone's going to get saggy skin. That's unavoidable. Deal with it. But not going quietly and not kind of voluntarily participating in your own decrepitude. That's up to you. Time will continue to pass, but what you put into that time and where you invest your energy is up to you. And there are already a growing body of studies that show that physical activity helps keep your brain functioning as well. That we like to think still, like Descartes, of our minds and bodies as separate units, but they're intimately connected. And so when you're working on your cardio and when you're working on your weights to whatever capacity you have, you're also doing things that are good for your mind. You're helping preserve your body as well as you can, and
Hmm.
that's ultimately going to give you the best odds for being more functional and more able to enjoy a better quality of life for as long as you have the good fortune to be alive. And I think that throwing in the towel really guarantees a lower quality of life for whatever
Yeah.
amount of time you have.
Yeah.
So why would you want to do that? I don't
I mean, like if you think about it, like think of people in their 80s and older that literally have lost so many functions in terms of like raising their arms, like whatever it might be. But if you continue doing those motions, maybe you lose some of them, but generally speaking, you'll be able to keep most of them. I remember seeing this video of this 82-year-old man who deadlifted. He's about my height, my weight. He deadlifted 225 pounds. He's like 82 years old. After he did it, granted, he did sort of like slowly collapse and sort of like somersaulted over, then got up. But you could expect you getting lightheaded or whatever. But all those are possibilities, and it's not necessarily having to intersect with like any particular genetic gifts.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a mistake to say, it's a cop out to say, oh, fitness is for the lucky ones, the
Mm-hmm.
genetically gifted ones. I say bullshit to that.
It's
Fitness,
specifically for the unlucky ones. If you're fucked up, if you got a bad back, it's specifically for you. Trust me on
yeah,
this.
yeah. I mean, fitness is basically for anyone who has the ability to drive themselves. And the people that don't, the people that have chosen, and it is a choice, not to do it, then they say, oh, you're so lucky, or you're genetically gifted, and I just don't have those genes. It wasn't up to me. I didn't have any agency. That is a denial of reality. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to live that way, you will pay the consequences of that. But let's not talk about luck here and genetic gifts. Yes, some people are genetically gifted, for sure. But you don't have to be genetically gifted to be fit and to be functional and to lift weights. You don't. You might not be setting world records, but you're going to be doing a lot better in your life than the people who don't. So it's a choice, and it's a matter of personal discipline. So anyway,
Yeah.
I guess that's a good place to end it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was good. Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yes, it was.
But look, T.S. Eliot's still on the docket. Maybe we should do this again, specifically on T. I didn't do all the C.S. Eliot preparation for nothing, right? So
we should totally do that.
Yeah.
And let's just do it again, and we'll just do a poetry thing.
Exactly. All right. This was very good. Thank you guys for watching. If you're listening to the audio podcast, you could also find this conversation on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Automachination. You could find it in the show notes. If you haven't hit like, please do so. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And I'll see you again soon.
Oh my God.